Hello, week 3. Here we are. We've got lots to go over today. I love what we're going to be discussing today. Today, I'm going to walk you through one of my favorite articles. It's 25 of my personal rules for writing and telling stories by Chuck Wendig. First, we're going to take a look at Blackboard and our course schedule, well, actually our week 3, and see what all this week entails so that we are all on the same page. And I can do that actually right here because I have the syllabus on my desk because I have a paper copy, which is awesome. So today's theme is Toolbox. And I use the term toolbox because in On Writing by Stephen King, he refers to our writing toolbox as something that we as writers must build in order to be effective at communicating our stories. And so we're going to go over a little bit of the information today, just a touch of some of the things that you can draw from reading On Writing. Also some information that I have collected in teaching classes and in teaching creative writing over some time. So I've been teaching these subjects since October of 2020. No, 2010. Daisha, get that right. 2010. Whew. Been teaching for a while. See, I'm starting to lose it. Hair's gone white, starting to lose it. But the author conversation today is with Shannon Yarbrough, or this week is with Shannon Yarbrough. He is a friend of mine who lives in St. Louis. We met in a writing group in St. Louis once I had finished my master's program and found that I needed some writers to connect with and to bounce ideas off of and to be in the presence of so that I can be staying encouraged in writing myself. I found a writing group and we met at a little bookstore about once a week and had a wonderful time. And a few of those people I still stay in touch with, and Shannon is one of those people. So I think that you are going to enjoy the interview between he and I. We certainly did. But he's got several books published and another one that just recently came out, and he's got a lot to offer. Very insightful, let me put it that way. And so to let you know also that most of his books, I don't want to say all, but most of his books have an LGBTQ theme. And so that might be something that some of you would be more interested in. Regardless of where you fall in levels of interest, he has some wonderful things to say. And I think that it would really behoove you to take notes while you listen and see what you can glean from what Shannon has to share with you. He was very happy to participate in this interview. And I was thrilled to have him. It's been a while since he and I had gotten to talk to each other. So that was a good time. And I'm grateful to Shannon for doing this, not just for me, but for all of you as well. He was very pleased to be on board with my project. So giant shout out and thank you to Shannon Yarbrough for his participation in our novel writing course. So you also have readings this week from On Writing, What Writing Is, and the Toolbox. And then you also have a reading in Structuring Your Novel this week, chapters 1, 2, and 24. The article for this week, as I said, is 25 of my personal rules for writing and telling stories by Chuck Wendig. We do have 2 discussion threads this week, and we'll take a look at those when we get towards the end. And I'm excited about those as well. I do have a PowerPoint presentation for today's talk. And I did tell you that the other videos weren't going to be as long as the introductory video. Well, I may have fibbed just a little bitty bit. This one might be. Who knows how much I'll talk. I could be just rattling away and not even realize that I am. But I do have some things that I want to share with you, some very specific information that I want to make sure that we're covering and you're not glossing over in your readings. And so we're going to do that. Probably for the next few weeks, though, the video lectures are going to be anywhere from 3 minutes to 10 minutes. Just kind of a quick rundown of what we're doing and etc. and so forth. So, but today it's not going to be exactly like that. Actually, in week 5, it's a little longer too. Just remembered. It's all good, right? You would love it. It's awesome. So here we go. So today's theme, write like the end is nigh. Write like it's your last day. What would you write? What would you say? So the Toolbox and also Chuck Wendig PowerPoint, things to know about writing. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm trying to jump in. I'm trying to click a button and nothing's happening. So here we go. Ha-ha! Stephen King says you must have a writing toolbox. He says, just as a good handyman has a toolbox filled with tools that help him build and repair, a good writer should have a toolbox filled with tools that can help him write. And he says the very top shelf of your toolbox should be vocabulary. Always should be vocabulary. That's tip top. Everything that you really, truly need. Not everything, but you got to start with your vocabulary skills. And then how do you build vocabulary skills? Do you run right out and you read the dictionary? Do you sit down with the source and play with it? No, you read. We spend time reading, and our vocabularies will grow naturally over time. And that's an important thing that Stephen King does talk about in the book on writing. Some toolbox odds and ends. So there it is, vocabulary, right? Then we need to be aware of deadwood. Stephen King says he always writes far more than he knows that he's going to need. In the rough draft, far supersede, over describe, over explain, go above board. Just let all your words come flying out, get them all on the page. For instance, we know a novel, to be considered a novel, it must have 80,000 words. Okay, that's bare minimum. If you want it to be a little bit longer, you want it to hit at least a 300-page mark, you're going to be looking in the neighborhood of 100,000 words. So let's say you're aiming for a 100,000 word manuscript. You're going to need to begin with 110 to 120,000 word manuscript so that you can begin to narrow it down to the words that actually need to remain. Overwrite. Always overwrite. So that in the editing process, you can remove the deadwood because you will naturally include information that's not necessary. And if you think, okay, well, I have to hit 80,000 and you only strive for 80,000, you're still going to have to cut deadwood. Well, now you're knocked down to 70,000 and you're in a panic because you actually need 10,000 more, but you just cut out 10,000. Well, guess what? You get to writing again. So with Stephen King, and then I back this up with my own experience, overwrite. Go beyond what your goal is so that you can remove deadwood. And what is deadwood? Deadwood is information that's irrelevant, that does not need to be there. It does nothing for the piece, and it can easily be removed. There are words like really, very, sometimes always. Those words are deadwood. Take them out. Don't keep them in your writing. We can keep them in speech, but we really shouldn't much keep them in speech either. And I just said really. But in our writing, we do not want to keep really and very because they are deadwood. Take them out. All right. That's going to eliminate a good portion of language from your writing. Also, deadwood can be using I too many times, or using a person's name too many times, or using pronouns too many times can also become deadwood. And deadwood's something that we have to check for when the manuscript is, when the rough draft is written. At that point in time, we can go back and look through and comb over and determine what things can be removed, what are non-essentials. All right, so then we need to talk about Abstract versus concrete. We need to be specific when we are describing things. Do not be vague. We cannot assume that our readers know what the cup looks like that you're drinking out of. If it's important to your story, what the cup is that the person is drinking out of, then you need to describe it. You need to say, it's a 44-ounce styrofoam quick trip cup full of tea. Because otherwise they might be thinking of a crystal goblet, right? With a little silver spoon where they can stir, right? So if it needs described, describe it. Make sure that you're not leaving details out. Be concrete, be specific with your details. And then we need to make sure that we're cutting inadequate clauses, things that are not modifying what they're supposed to be modifying. They're not doing their job. I've got an example of this here in a little while, but we do this when we're writing and we're not fully paying attention to our order of words, and we will put a sentence together and not realize that this clause, this subordinate clause, is not modifying the correct part of the sentence, right? For instance, I belong on a beach with messy hair and a margarita in hand, watching the waves. Think about that. I belong on a beach with messy hair and a margarita in hand, watching the waves. We get what the person's trying to say. However, right, we have a beach with messy hair and a margarita that's watching the waves. Maybe we could say, while I watch the waves with a margarita in my hand, comma, or with messy hair, comma, I belong on a beach where I watch the waves while holding a margarita in my hand. You can find another way to put the sentence together so that it actually makes sense for your reader. Active voice, we want to stay in active voice when we're writing stories. This is where your subject performs the action. It is direct, clear, and concise. John likes the poem. We want to avoid passive voice. The subject of the sentence is acted upon. I put boo. Stephen King talks about this in On Writing. So I hope that you will read through this week's section with note-taking intent so that you can draw some insight from the things that he's going to share with you. He's going to be saying the same things that I'm saying, but of course there are a lot more, intellectual sounding coming from him. That's kind of backwards, but whatever. But the instance of passive voice here is the poem is liked by John. And it's kind of like, oh, I want to be a little bit hands-off. So we'll say the poem is liked by John. It's much more active to say John likes the poem. And we want to be more active in our writing, which means we want to refrain from passive verbs, and we want to refrain from keeping our subjects at the end of our sentences. Triteness, meaning let's avoid cliches, let's avoid overused sayings. Don't continue to use words and phrases that are worn out from overuse. You feel me? Right. We want to avoid those type of sayings. Alliteration. Now, this one hurts my feelings because I'm a fan of alliteration. I enjoy it. I like when I write, I like for all of the language to have kind of a melody to it, and alliteration can help with that. There's a time and a place for it. And making sure that we're using it appropriately is highly important. There are places where it's needed, perhaps, and then places where it is not. So we need to understand our story well enough to know where we use figurative language and where we avoid it. He says, Stephen King says, no shilly-shallying. Get right down to business. Get right to your story. Jump into it. Don't take 15 years to come around to the action at hand. Go ahead and get there. Take your reader with you. Stephen King also says in On Writing, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. You might be a fan of adverbs, and hey, I mean, you do you, but he's not wrong. He's not wrong. He also says adverbs are the tools of timid writers. That one's a little bit more ouch, right? I prefer not being a timid writer, and I understand what he's saying here. When we are putting an adverb with a verb, there's always a stronger verb that will take the place of both of those. He said quickly, he blurted. There's stronger verbs, and we have an abundance, almost an infinite number of active verbs that we can choose from and replace adverbs and weak verb combos. All right. So instead of he ran quickly, we could say he rushed. Right. I was waiting patiently could be I threw that one out there before I really thought it through. What would be a potential replacement strong verb for waited patiently? Lounged. I lounged. Oh, I like that. That's nice. Yes. All right, some other things that we need to talk about. Our writing needs to be visually pleasing. This is something that you cannot miss. You have to get this down. Your writing needs to look easy to read to your reader. If all of your pages are one paragraph, a reader is going to open your writing up and go, ugh. You've got to have paragraph breaks, and they need to be frequent so that your writing looks easy to read. I don't think I have an example right here on my desk. But big chunky paragraphs look difficult to read. I mean, think about that. If you were to turn a page in a book and there's no paragraph break on an entire page, and then you look at the next page and there's no paragraph break, we get a sense of panic almost about trying to navigate through that without a page break that our brain can see and knows it's going to get a chance to breathe. There's something about that. There's psychology in this. We have to make our writing visually pleasing. We have to give it some breaks, some pauses, and those come with paragraph breaks. So please do that for your reader and for yourself, truly. All right, our word choices. We need to be very clear with our word choices and understand our audience well enough to know what words they're going to understand. You know, this is in regards to our setting, our tone, right? We want to make sure that our descriptors are all words that are accessible to our audience. We don't want to be using unfamiliar terms because then they're going to get lost, right? Now, I want to throw some ideas over here on the left side of the screen, and we're going to talk through these quickly. We do want to avoid cliches in our writing, and I said that already, but we want to avoid trite or overused words and sayings. When it comes to euphemisms, I'm not going to say don't use them, but what I say in regard to euphemisms is this. You need to think about your audience and the content of what you're writing. If you need to use a euphemism, do. So maybe you're still at this point going, what's a euphemism? Well, a euphemism is a soft word used in place of a harsh word, or a soft phrase used in place of a harsh phrase. So instead of saying someone died, you could say they passed, right? Or instead of saying damn, you would say darn. So it's softer language. Do we use softer language? Do we use harsher language? That really depends on your message and your audience. What will your audience hear and what will your audience disregard? You need to understand that. We also need to be authentic to our characters. So if your character is this burly, like right off the streets, kind of scary fella, then he's probably going to use some harsh language, and you need to be authentic to your characters. So sometimes we use euphemisms, sometimes we use harsh language, but it needs to be a very specific choice. Other times you want to avoid both and just be more visually descriptive. And so the breakdown that I like to use with this is, and this is appropriate for a day like today when it's 115 degrees outside, it's hot outside. Okay. But I could say, well, golly, it's darn hot out there. Or I could say, it is damn hot outside. Or I could say, I took 2 eggs, cracked them on the sidewalk, and they both fried up in about 3 minutes. Yeah. Visually descriptive works best. So these are specific things that you need to face when you're writing and when you're editing. Okay. Which type of language do you want to use in order to hook your reader? Make a very specific decision there. Repetition. Repetition can be hurtful, and it can also be helpful to your writing. Oh, with my comp classes, I use The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King to illustrate lessons here on visually pleasing, repetition, other things. That's a great story to walk through this list with. And in particular, The Man Who Loved Flowers. In this story, we have, I'm going to give it away a little bit, so don't get mad. It's in the Night Shift collection, which is right here. This is my Comp 1 textbook. You're like, what? I know, right? Here we are, The Man Who Loved Flowers. I'm kind of tempted to read it to you so then I can actually talk with you about it. What do you think? On the spot decision. Let's do it. Let's do it. Because there's important points I want to make here, and this is very effective for us as writers. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to be reading The Man Who Loved Flowers. You can see that by Stephen King. Right, and I have discovered recently that I frequently use the term I'm gonna or I'ma. So from southeastern Oklahoma, y'all. All right, I am going to read The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King, and then I will jump into talking about some of these things here. So first of all, you know what? Let's go ahead and we're going to stop the screen share because I want to show you. See, I was talking about visually pleasing. See all those big chunky paragraphs? Okay. Now, if this were the first page that you turn to, it doesn't look as difficult to read. Big chunky paragraphs, broken up white space. Broken up white space is more inviting. Psychology. So here we go. We're going to read The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King. And if you would like to pause the video and look up a copy, you can just simply type in The Man Who Loved Flowers, Stephen King PDF online, and you will find a copy. This is in the public domain. It's an old enough story that you can access it online without having to pay for it. So you can find the story. So pause this if you want to find it, or just listen. I'm very familiar with this story, so I almost have it memorized, but I'm going to make my way through it. On an early evening in May of 1963, a young man with his hand in his pocket walked briskly up New York's 3rd Avenue. The air was soft and beautiful. The sky was darkening by slow degrees from blue to the calm and lovely violet of dusk. There are people who love the city, and this was one of the nights that made them love it. Everyone standing in the doorways of the delicatessens and dry cleaning shops and restaurants seemed to be smiling. An old lady pushing 2 bags of groceries in an old baby pram grinned at the young man and hailed him. "Hey, beautiful." The young man gave her a half smile and raised his hand in a wave. She passed on her way thinking, he's in love. He had that look about him. He was dressed in a light gray suit, the narrow tie pulled down a little, his top collar buttoned undone. His hair was dark and cut short. His complexion was fair, his eyes a light blue. Not an extraordinary face, but on this soft spring evening, on this avenue, in May of 1963, he was beautiful. And the old woman found herself thinking with a moment's sweet nostalgia that in spring, anyone can be beautiful if they're hurrying to meet the one of their dreams for dinner and maybe dancing after. Spring is the only season when nostalgia never seems to turn bitter, and she went on her way glad that she had spoken to him and glad he had returned the compliment by raising his hand in half salute. The young man crossed 63rd Street, walking with a bounce in his step and that same half smile on his lips. Partway up the block, an old man stood beside a chip green handcart filled with yellow flowers. The predominant color was yellow, a yellow fever of jonquils and late crocuses. The old man also had carnations and a few hothouse tea roses, mostly yellow and white. He was eating a pretzel and listening to a bulky transistor radio that was sitting kitty corner on his handcart. The radio poured out bad news that no one listened to. A hammer murderer was still on the loose. JFK had declared that the situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam, the guy reading the news called it, would bear watching. An unidentified woman had been pulled out of the East River. A grand jury had failed to indict a crime overlord in the current city administration's war on heroin. The Russians had exploded a nuclear device. None of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. The air was soft and sweet. Two men with beer bellies stood outside a bakery, pitching nickels and ribbing each other. Spring trembled on the edge of summer, and in the city, summer is the season of dreams. The young man passed the flower stand, and the sound of the bad news faded. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, and thought it over. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the something in there again. For a moment, his face seemed puzzled, lonely, almost haunted. And then, as his hand left the pocket, it regained its former expression of eager expectation. He turned back to the flower stand, smiling. He would bring her some flowers. That would please her. He loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Little things, because he was far from rich. A box of candy, a bracelet, once only a bag of Valencia oranges because he knew they were Norma's favorite. "My young friend," the vendor said, as the man in the gray suit came back, running his eyes over the stock in the handcart. The vendor was maybe 68, wearing a torn gray knitted sweater and a soft cap in spite of the warmth of the evening. His face was a map of wrinkles, his eyes were deep in pouches, and a cigarette jittered between his fingers. But he also remembered how it was to be young in the spring, young and so much in love that you practically zoomed everywhere. The vendor's face was normally sour, but now he smiled a little, just as the old woman pushing the groceries had, because this guy was such an obvious case. He brushed pretzel crumbs from the front of his baggy sweater and thought, if this kid were sick, they'd have him in intensive care right now. "How much are your flowers?" the young man asked. "I'll make you up a nice bouquet for $1. Those tea roses, they're hothouse. Cost a little more, 70 cents a piece. I'll say half a dozen for $3.50. "Expensive," the young man said. "Nothing good comes cheap, my young friend. Didn't your mother ever teach you that?" The young man grinned. She might have mentioned it at that. Sure she did. I give you half a dozen, 2 red, 2 yellow, 2 white. Can't do no better than that, can I? Put in some baby's breath. Ooh, they love that. And fill it out with some nice fern." "Nice. Or you can have the bouquet for $1. "They?" the young man asked, still smiling. "My young friend," the flower vendor said, flicking his cigarette butt into the gutter and returning the smile. "No one buys flowers for themselves in May. It's like a national law. You understand what I mean?" The young man thought of Norma, her happy, surprised eyes and her gentle smile, and he ducked his head a little. "I guess I do at that." Sure you do. What do you say?" "Well, what do you think?" I'm going to tell you what I think. Hey, advice is still free, isn't it? The young man smiled and said, I guess it's the only thing left that is. You damn tootin' it is, the flower vendor said. Okay, my young friend, if the flowers are for your mother, you get her the bouquet. A few jonquils, a few crocuses, some lily of the valley. She don't spoil it by saying, oh, Junior, I love them. How much did they cost? Oh, that's too much. Don't you know enough not to throw your money around? The young man threw his head back and laughed. The vendor said, but if it's your girl, that's a different thing, my son, and you know it. You bring her the tea roses and she don't turn into an accountant, you take my meaning. Hey, she's going to throw her arms around your neck. I'll take the tea roses, the young man said. And this time it was the flower vendor's turn to laugh. The two men pitching nickels glanced over, smiling. Hey, kid, one of them called. You want to buy a wedding ring cheap? I'll sell you mine. I don't want it no more. The young man grinned and blushed to the roots of his dark hair. The flower vendor picked out 6 tea roses, snipped the stems a little, spritzed them with water, and wrapped them in a large conical spill. Tonight's weather looks just the way you'd want it, the radio said. Fair and mild, temps in the mid to upper 60s. Perfect for a little rooftop stargazing if you're the romantic type. Enjoy, Greater New York. Enjoy. The flower vendor scotch-taped the seam of the paper spill and advised the young man to tell his lady that a little sugar added to the water she put them in would preserve them longer. I'll tell her, the young man said. He held out a $5 bill. Thank you. Just doing the job, my young friend, the vendor said, giving him $1 and 2 quarters. His smile grew a bit sad. Give her a kiss for me. On the radio, the Four Seasons began singing Sherry. Sherry, baby, I gotta know, will you be my girl? The young man pocketed his change and went on up the street, eyes wide and alert and eager, looking not so much around him at the life ebbing and flowing up and down Third Avenue, as inward and ahead, anticipating. But certain things did impinge. A mother pulling a baby in a wagon, the baby's face comically smeared with ice cream. A little girl jumping rope and sing-songing out her rhyme. Betty and Henry up in a tree, Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes Henry with a baby carriage. 2 women stood outside a washateria smoking and comparing pregnancies. A group of men were looking in a hardware store window at a gigantic color TV with a 4-figure price tag. A baseball game was on, and all the players' faces looked green. The playing field was a vague strawberry color, and the New York Mets were leading the Phillies by a score of 6-1 in the top of the 9th. He walked on, carrying the flowers, unaware that the 2 women outside the washateria had stopped talking for a moment and had watched him wistfully as he walked by with his paper of tea roses. Their days of receiving flowers were long over. He was unaware of a young traffic cop who stopped the cars at the intersection of 3rd and 69th with a blast on his whistle to let him cross. The cop was engaged himself and recognized the dreamy expression on the young man's face from his own shaving mirror, where he had often seen it lately. He was unaware of the 2 teenage girls who passed him going the other way and then clutched themselves and giggled. At 73rd Street, he stopped and turned right. This street was a little darker, lined with brownstones and walk-down restaurants with Italian names. 3 blocks down, a stickball game was going on in the fading light. The young man did not go that far. Half a block down, he turned into a narrow lane. Now the stars were out, gleaming softly, and the lane was dark and shadowy, lined with vague shapes of garbage cans. The young man was alone now. No, not quite. A wavering yowl rose in the purple gloom, and the young man frowned. It was some tomcat's love song, and there's nothing pretty about that. He walked more slowly and glanced at his watch. It was 7:45, and Norma should be just... Then he saw her, coming toward him from the courtyard, wearing dark blue slacks and a sailor blouse that made his heart ache. It was always a surprise seeing her for the first time. It was always such a sweet shock. She looked so young. Now his smile shone out, radiated out, and he walked faster. "Norma," he said. She looked up and smiled, but as they drew together, the smile faded. His own smile trembled a little, and he felt a moment's disquiet. Her face over the sailor blouse suddenly seemed blurred. It was getting dark now. Could he have been mistaken? Surely not. It was Norma. "I brought you flowers," he said in a happy relief, and handed the paper spill to her. She looked at them for a moment, smiled, and she handed them back. "Thank you. But you're mistaken," she said. "My name is Norma," he whispered, and pulled the short-handled hammer out of his coat pocket where it had been all along. "They're for you, Norma. It was always for you. All for you." She backed away, her face a round white blur, her mouth an opening black O of terror, and she wasn't Norma. Norma was dead. She had been dead for 10 years, and it didn't matter because she was going to scream. And he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream, and he swung the hammer. The spill of flowers fell out of his hand. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the dented trash cans where cats made alien love in the dark, screaming in love, screaming, screaming. He swung the hammer and she didn't scream, but she might scream because she wasn't Norma. None of them were Norma. And so he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer. She wasn't Norma. And so he swung the hammer as he had done 5 other times. Some unknown time later, he slipped the hammer back into his inner coat pocket and backed away from the dark shadow sprawled on the cobblestones, away from the litter of tea roses by the garbage cans. He turned and left the narrow lane. It was full dark now. The stickball players had gone in. If there were bloodstains on his suit, they wouldn't show. Not in the dark, not in the soft, late spring dark. And her name had not been Norma, but he knew what his name was. It was Love. His name was Love, and he walked these dark streets because Norma was waiting for him, and he would find her someday soon. He began to smile. A bounce came into his step as he walked on down 73rd Street. A middle-aged married couple sitting on the steps of their building watched him go by, head cocked, eyes far away, a half smile on his lips. When he had passed by, the woman said, "How come you never look that way anymore?" "Huh?" "Nothing," she said. But she watched the young man in the gray suit disappear into the gloom of the encroaching night and thought if there was anything more beautiful than springtime, it was young love. That, my friends, was The Man Who Loved Flowers by Stephen King. It is in the Night Shift collection. Absolutely my favorite Stephen King story. There are quite a few things to talk about here. I already talked to you about, the big chunks, and then the more inviting pages like this one. We want to make our writing look easy to read, visually pleasing. We also want to pay attention to word choices. Something I want to point out in this story, and if we were in the room together and we could have this discussion with everybody looking at the paper in your hands, it would be something enjoyable. But I want to point a couple things out to you. Up until, there's a certain point in the story where most of the adjectives that he has used have been somewhat romantic and dreamy, soft, sweet, right? He's using a lot of these words to the point where when I used to read this to roomfuls of men at the trade school, I'd tell them, we're reading a Stephen King story today, and they'd all be like, yeah, they'd all get real excited. Well, then I'd start reading this, and they're like, wait, why are you reading us a romance? I was like, hold on. But it does. It has that tone. It has a very soft, it's evening. He's walking down the street. He looks like he's in love. Everyone around him is looking at him dreamily, thinking, oh, to be young and in love. Even the description of the flower vendor's cart, everything about the beginning of this story it's melodic. It's like, it's musical. It's soft. It's beautiful. Even the radio, it's playing music, blah, 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 blah. All this is happening. But then you have the book, it's on page 458. You get to this sentence. At 73rd Street, he stopped and turned right. This street was a little darker, lined with brownstones and walked down restaurants with Italian names. And from that point forward, the word choices change. The adjectives change. Now we have dark, gloomy, purple, vague, narrow, yowl. We have different language choices that take the story from being this dreamy, romantic walk on a New York evening in May to dun 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 with adjectives. But guess what? You have access to the very same adjectives that Stephen King does. Wow. It's just how we choose to use them, right? And I want to point out my absolute favorite word in this entire piece, speaking about word choices. After the event has occurred, we have some unknown time later. He slipped the hammer back into his inner coat pocket and backed away from the dark shadow sprawled on the cobblestones. Away from the litter of tea roses by the garbage cans, he turned and left the narrow lane. It was full dark now. Five words. The third word, full. Full is a word that we use every day. You say, my gas tank is full, my stomach is full. We take the word full for granted. It's a very overused word. Like, we don't even think about it, we just use it. But in this story, in the pen of Stephen King, because literally in those days you hand wrote or typed on a typewriter, he has taken the word full. It was full dark now, and given it a spiritual significance. It's not just dark, it's full dark. And you as the reader know what had just happened. So you understand full dark. It was full dark now. Beautiful word choice. And such a simple word. When it comes to vocabulary, Stephen King talks about don't be intentional in trying to build your vocabulary. Don't try to sound more fancy than you are. Use the words that you speak. Use words that you know. Use words that you know your audience will know. Be authentic. Just use those words well. Now, let's talk about repetition. You're like, oh, there was some repetition. Yeah, there was, right? But hold on. We got a couple other things to look at here. Guess what? Guess what? I dare to correct Stephen King. I even put a tweet out about this last year. My class dared me to do it. We wanted to see if we would get some kind of a response. We didn't, but it was a try. I mean, we experimented. Hashtagged him in it and everything. But in this story, there are two places where I want to say, what were you thinking? Because of bad repetition. Let's take a look at this. In the first paragraph, towards the bottom, an old lady pushing 2 bags of groceries in an old baby pram. Old and old. Oh, there are lots of other words for old. We don't want to use a word twice in a sentence when there could be a better term, right? We don't want that type of repetition. So here, an elderly woman, an old lady pushing 2 bags of groceries in a decrepit baby pram, something. Use a different terminology than old and old in the same sentence. Ugh, no bueno. Now, we move on to the next one. Oh, Stephen King. This is the one I wrote the tweet about. So on page 454, if you have the textbook or the book, but on 454, it says this: he loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Really? He loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. Stephen. He loved to see her eyes light up with joy when he brought her a surprise. How about he loved to see her eyes light up when he brought her a surprise? 2 surprise in 1 sentence. No, not effective repetition. There are many readers that's going to make go, ugh. We want to watch for instances of bad repetition. Now, good repetition in this story? Oh, yes. Here it is. So there are quite a few places here. I'm just going to read this again. She backed away, her face a round white blur, her mouth an opening black O of terror, and she wasn't Norma. Norma was dead. Norma had been dead for 10 years. So she wasn't Norma. Norma was dead. She had been dead. A repeated word in this instance works. And it didn't matter because she was going to scream. And he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream. And he swung the hammer to spill of flowers fell out of his hand, and the spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the dented trash cans where the cats made alien love in the dark, screaming in love, screaming. And she didn't scream, or he swung the hammer and she didn't scream, but she might scream because she wasn't Norma. None of them were Norma. I'm gonna stop right there. The word scream. Did you count how many times it's used? I count 9. In a paragraph. Effective terminology use, perhaps? Well, let's look at deeper. This whole chunk right here is amazing. My favorite one is this one. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses. The spill spilled, spilling. I mean, the master at using words, except when he's using surprise and old and old. This section, though, oh my gosh. And how about the hammer, right? So here we go. Let's read this again. And it didn't matter because she was going to scream. And he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream. And as he swung the hammer, the spill of flowers fell out of his hand. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the dented trash cans where cats made alien love in the dark. Screaming in love. Screaming. He swung the hammer and she didn't scream, but she might scream because she wasn't Norma. None of them were Norma. And he swung the hammer. She wasn't Norma. And so he swung the hammer as he had done 5 other times. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 swung the hammers. It's a beautiful passage. And it's really fun for me to read this in a classroom of people where we're face to face, because at this point in the story, you can see the discomfort on the audience while you're reading it, because they're like, oh, because it's like you're there and you see it happening, you feel it happening, and you're like, stop, stop. That's achieved by repetition. It is a technique, a strategy that we can use as writers to build tension, to build conflict, but we want to make sure that we're doing it well. We don't want to be writing, he loved to see her eyes light up with surprise and joy when he brought her a surprise. We want to say, swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer. We want to say the spill, spilled, spilling. The cat screaming in love, screaming, screaming. We want to use our repetition in the service of the tone of our story. Isn't that amazing? Now, another thing I want to point out in this story, if you have the book, which you probably don't, but you might, because you might have paused long enough to go and grab it. But on page 453, which is towards the beginning of the story, another one of my absolute favorite parts of this story, it says, the radio poured out bad news that no one listened to. A hammer murderer was still on the loose. JFK had declared that the situation in a little Asian country called Vietnam would bear watching. An unidentified woman had been pulled from the East River. A grand jury had failed to indict a crime overlord, and the current city administrations were on heroin. The Russians had exploded a nuclear device. None of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. The air was soft and sweet. This passage right here, he's giving you the foreshadowing, but what he has so masterfully done is sandwiched it with two statements where he says, shh, don't listen. He straight up says the radio poured out bad news that no one listened to, and then follows it up with, none of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. And so right in the middle of that, he's given you what the story is about, but then also followed it up with a lot of things that in 1963 were major news events. So the hammer murderer part gets lost, especially for a 1960s audience when this was originally written. When we read it today, this paragraph doesn't have the same effect that it did on a 1960s audience, because a 1960s audience understands Vietnam. They understand the current city administrations were on heroin. They understand the Russians exploding a nuclear device. Those would have been major developments in that time period in their lives. And so that audience, when they read this, the hammer murderer part, more than likely, because he's number one, said, don't listen to this, and then at the end says, none of it seemed real, can get lost in the midst of all of these things that are real. Does that make sense? It's beautiful sandwiching. Absolutely. If you want to do some foreshadowing in your story, this is a great example of how to build that kind of a scenario where you're going to let your reader have some insight into what you're trying to say, but then pull it away. Don't give in. Just give them a little, but then take it right back. None of it seemed real. None of it seemed to matter. The air was soft and sweet. Brilliant writing. Absolutely brilliant writing. I love this story. And there are other things that we could talk about from this story. I love the inclusion of the Betty and Henry up in a tree, and then the music references too. Really gives us an idea of what the time period is. He doesn't even have to say it's May of 1963 for us to get that vibe just from details that he has included. It's really cool. So, highly recommend the Night Shift collection from Stephen King. If you've never read through that, I highly recommend you get yourself a copy of that, because the stories aren't long. That's actually where Children of the Corn comes from, and some other stories that you would be familiar with. come from this piece, like trucks. If you've seen the movie Maximum Overdrive, this is where that comes from. You also might be familiar with the Boogeyman, the Lawnmower Man. Those have been turned into movies. One of my favorites in here is Night Surf. It's about a pandemic and the aftermath. And what's really interesting is he wrote this right after the pandemic in 1968. Now, some of you are thinking, what? There was a pandemic in 1968? There have been pandemics all throughout the existence of humanity. I'm not laughing about it to make light of it. I'm laughing because we need to be students of history. So Stephen King was a college student, a young man, when that pandemic hit in 1968. And so Night Surf is his reflection on that event. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool when you read it from that understanding. As authors, we always write ourselves into our stories. So with any of these, you read them and you go, where's Stephen King in there? You'll find him. You absolutely will find him. But there are 20 stories in this collection. It might be 18, but I think it's 20. Fantastic, fantastic collection. Highly recommend. But yeah, that is where Children of the Corn comes from. So repetition, we talked about that. Slang. Slang is also audience dependent, just like euphemisms. Do I use slang in my story? Well, is it true to your character? Is it something that the intended audience is going to appreciate, or will it deter them? Will it draw them out of the story? These are things you have to consider. So slang is dependent. You have to make that decision. And if you have a character that you're trying to set up as someone who would use slang and you don't use slang in their dialogue, they're not going to be authentic. And so we have to also think about that and consider that. That's like somebody tells you on this movie that you're watching that the character is French, but they have no accent at all, no French accent whatsoever. It's inauthentic to the character. And so we want to be cognizant of slang in our writing. If we are intending it and it isn't something that's going to deter our readers, then we need to make sure that we're using it well. And that might mean that you need to go spend some time with people that talk like that so that you can get the slang down correctly for your story. Now, fancy writing. Don't try to sound fancy. Unless you're in dialogue, you've got a wealthy character or a stuck-up character and you need to be able to write them well. Pull up some YouTube people or some YouTube videos and listen to fancy people talk and be authentic in your characters. But insofar as just your writing of description and your writing of setting and all of these things, don't use language that isn't authentic to you. All right. Stephen King doesn't. He absolutely doesn't. Every single word in this collection and in any of his books is accessible to all of his readers. And we're from a varied set of backgrounds as Stephen King readers. So don't make your writing sound like it's not you. We want to avoid fancy writing. And when it comes to sexist language, that is a specific decision you need to make. Am I going to charge into that, or am I going to be, kind of hands off and be considerate of my audience? That's a choice that you need to make. Announcements. Now, this more relates when we are writing. This is something that I talk to my comp classes about, but it does also work in a book. In a book, we want to avoid making announcements. An announcement would be, this lecture is going to tell you that. This business letter is to inform you. This essay will inform you that. It's when we set up and we tell, in this chapter, you will discover. Don't make announcements in your writing. This is going to be applicable to fiction. It can be applicable to fiction. And we might do it in the sense that we're writing deadwood statements like, where we could say, a long time ago in a land far, far away, and we can use deadwood and cliches, and it might be setting up the story in a way that it would be better if we just jumped right into some action and skipped all of that other stuff, skipped the announcement, skipped the cliche, skip, and just jump right into, he fell off the cliff. Boom, he landed with a thud after falling from 5,000 feet. You know, body parts went this way, eyeballs went that way, whatever you need to do. We want to grab the readers and not waste time with announcements or deadwood or cliches. Be aware of unfamiliar terms. We want to make sure that we are using words that our audience, our intended audience, is going to understand. And so if you are using unfamiliar terms, you want to make sure and always give those a definition. Okay. Sometimes when I'm reading students' writings in this class, you know, I will come across some things that I don't understand, especially those of you who are going to be writing fantasy genre. You will be using language I don't get. And so you need to keep me in mind as your reader, because that is not my genre. It is not something that I'm going to go stand at a bookstore and go, ooh, I want to read that. Never. Never is that what I'm going to pick up to read. And so you need to know that about your audience. And I'm just letting you know in advance, with me as your audience, you need to be able to give some descriptive language to terminologies that may be unfamiliar. There's nothing wrong with making a clarification as a point of dialogue on what something means, or finding another way to say a particular idea, or just you can really handle that with your character dialogue, truly. Oh, really? What does that mean? Or, you know, oh, I never really got what that acronym stood for. What does that stand for, boss? You know, like, you can work those things into the story. It increases your word count as well. So that's a win. The imperative and I. If you are writing something in the first person, you want to avoid using I as much as possible. It is a turnoff to readers when the story reads I. No one wants to sit through that. And we need to be very careful to avoid overusing I. And so that's one of those things that you're going to catch more in the editing stage than in your initial writing. It is normal when you are sitting down and free writing and just getting words on paper. It is normal to overuse I. It is normal to overuse a character's name. It is normal to overuse pronouns. So don't try to correct those things as you write. In the editing process, you want to look at it, not read it every time that you go through to edit for particular things, but look at the paper, look at the names, look at the pronouns, look at I. Circle all of them. Have a paper printout of your manuscript and literally go through with your hand and circle them with a pen. That's going to make an impression on you. I had to do this as an assignment in the master's program, and it blew me away how much in a first-person story, first-person perspective story, how much I was using I. Changed me as a writer, because once I saw it, like physically went through and circled all of the I's, I was like, done. I get it. No need to say anything more. There didn't need to be a huge lecture, because I got it when I saw it. So we want to be careful with that. Another time in a master's class, I had an assignment where we were to write an imperative piece. And the imperative piece was in first person, but we were not to use I or you. We were to tell someone how to do something without using I or you. Now, I like to use my tools. And so what I did was I wrote my piece, and then I got on to Word where I was writing, and I went up to that button in the top right-hand corner that says find, right? I used the find feature, or it might be search, whatever it is in your Word version. It was find in mine, and I put the word you in, and then clicked search, and I found all of the U's. And then I figured out how to take them out so that the story still read well. And then I did the same thing with I. I put in I, find, And I went through and I found all of the times where I had used I that I hadn't caught, pulled them out, fixed it, turned it in. Out of 14 people, mine was the only one that got it 100% correct. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that I used my tools. And I sat there wondering as we're doing peer review and I'm looking at other people's papers, I'm like, did you not think to use your tools? Because we have tools for catching these. The point here, again, is we don't want to overuse I names for pronouns. Okay. We can overuse them to the point where your paragraph reads, he did this, then he did that, then he said, then he went, then he liked, and then he jumped, and then and Grammarly Premium is going to go, hey, you've said he too many times in this sentence, except it's going to word it a little nicer than what I just did. So we want to be aware of that in our writing. But again, that's an editing stage thing that we're going to be looking for, not so much in our free writing when we're sitting down and we're just letting the words fly. We want to use variety. We need variety in our paragraph lengths. We need variety in our sentence lengths, and we need variety in our word lengths. Variety creates visually pleasing environment. It creates white space. It creates pauses and breaks for the brain. So we want to use variety. Be very careful with word art. I'm a queen of word art. I love word art, especially the ellipses, which is the ... I write exactly as I speak, and so it's very drama laden. I have a lot of dramatic pauses when I speak, and so those are inserted into my writing. I turned one of my manuscripts into my editor a few years ago, and it was full of ellipses. And she's like, Daisha, no, take these out. And so you know what I did? I put dashes instead. And then she was like, Daisha, no. I was like, well, so I had to go in and then change some of the words around and sentences around. I used some semicolons. I fixed some sentences to read in a more fluid way. I used a few dashes and a few ... Then I had to go in and correct those things. We don't want to overuse word art. We don't want to overuse italics. We should only use italics for internal thoughts of our characters. Bold when you really need something to stand out, but don't like have like something in every other sentence stand out. I understand sometimes you want it to, but we need to be very specific and reserved with our word art. That coming from the queen of word art. So it's something I know, and I'm going to tell you to watch out for. So do as I say, not as I do. And then I put revise, because anytime that we are doing the editing stage for our work, we should revise a minimum of 3 times. And so I've got it written there 3 times for you. And in order to increase our vocabulary, in order to become better writers, Stephen King says you must be a reader. You must. If you want to be naturally progressing and getting better at writing and getting better at all of these things, you need to be encountering the writing of others. And so we want to be intentional in the types of things that we're reading. We want to be making sure that we're reading things that are well done, that are not just like, off Facebook or Snapchat or TikTok. Please don't turn to those places for your reading materials if you're looking to have your vocabulary grow, unless you're researching slang. And in that case, maybe that is the right spot to go to, one of those. Oh, golly. We need to be very careful with punctuation too. But like I said, and we're going to see this again in a moment, let Grammarly Premium take care of this for you. Please. It's a beautiful resource. So we jump back over to the right side of the screen here. And to remind you from The Man Who Loved Flowers, sometimes it is the simplest word that carries the most significance. I love, love, love the way he wrote, "It was full dark now." Full dark. Beautiful sentence, 5 words long. Every one of those words is a simple word, a word that we use on a daily basis. It was full dark now. But put together in the context of that story, whoa, absolutely whoa. So it can be just a bit of white space, just a bit of white space. A new paragraph is all that you might need to give your reader the opportunity to go, okay, I can breathe. And that keeps them engaged in your story. It keeps them from going, ugh, I don't want to read this. It's hard. Put it down. Books that are not visually pleasing get put down. This is too hard unless you've got a real dedicated reader on your hand. But most people are wanting to read for entertainment. They're wanting to read to relax. And so we have to keep that in mind. It's got to look visually pleasing. It has to look easy to read. We always want to be talking to our audience and not around them, right? So we want to be specific. We have to know our audience. Who are we writing this for? It's vitally important. And cut out what's not necessary. Be aware of dead wood, what needs to come out. We will be using language that is not necessary. And so we will be removing that, right? Watch your grammar and your spelling. For instance, don't turn to memes as where you want to draw your grammar skills from. This cracked me up. Hilarious. Commas are important, people. And this person comes along. Commas aren't people. Oh, funny. A missing comma changes the sentence. What he meant to say was, hey, people, commas are important. He needed a comma. That's called irony. Now we talked a little bit earlier about the order of our words. When I said, I belong on a beach, right? With messy hair and holding a margarita in my hand, watching the waves. The order of our words can draw our reader out and stop them from enjoying our story. For instance, if your dog poops, please pick it up. Order of words is very important, as is punctuation. It clarifies what you're trying to say. So this is one of the things you want to review for when you are going back through your writing, making sure that you've actually written what it is that you want your reader to see or to understand. For instance, again, attention, toilet only for disabled, elderly, pregnant children. Thank you for shopping with us. Not only are there missing commas or periods, whatever, but disabled, elderly, and pregnant can all 3 be adjectives or are adjectives, modifiers, and children's a noun. Oh, how about we said toilet only for children, period. Disabled, period. Elderly, period. Pregnant, period. Otherwise, that is one really special toilet. Oh, one of my favorite things on the planet. Punctuation is vitally important. Make sure that yours is correct so that your storyline reads the way that you want it to. Best sausage supper in St. Louis. Come and eat, Pastor Tom Ressler. No, thanks. I think I'm going to skip that fellowship meal. Not so excited about that. Oh, okay. So also right here, brownie points, if y'all know where that video is from right there. That's Julian Smith. He's on YouTube. He's a lot of fun. That's from a video called Eat Randy, where he's talking about fattening his friend up so he can eat him for dinner. Eat Randy, eat Randy, eat Randy. It's not okay. Again, order of words. Boy paralyzed after tumor fights back to gain a black belt. I mean, that's a strong little tumor. How about after tumor, paralyzed boy fights back to gain a black belt? Fix it so that it says what you actually want it to say. It's very funny. Here's another example. We're almost done with these, I promise. In comp classes, I take this and make it last a whole lot longer because it amuses me. I think it's hilarious. But at the same time, it's serious because we need to watch out for these things in our writing. And you're thinking, oh, I don't do that. Yeah, you do. That's why editing's important. Illegally parked cars will be fine. This is something that your grammar check isn't going to catch. This isn't going to require your eyeballs and your ears. This is the kind of thing you're going to catch when you read it out loud because all of those words are spelled correctly, right? And the sentence makes sense, sort of. It's not what you're trying to say, though. You're trying to say illegally parked cars will be fined. Doesn't it make you want to like drive around town and take some of the letters off of signs? They shouldn't make it so easy because that's a really funny thing to do. Not that I've ever done that. Another thing I wanted to point out is please do not use quotation marks for emphasis in your stories. Quotation marks as emphasis are air quotes, and we use those for sarcasm. It works the same in our writing. So do not use quotation marks as emphasis. We do not want to use lotion. I don't know, maybe you do. I don't. All right, so download Grammarly. Make sure that you're running it on your manuscripts. Make sure that you are also reading your work out loud. I'm going to come to that again here in just a little bit. Make sure that you're editing well to catch all of these things that I have mentioned, things that I've already talked about today. And we are now ready to take a look at the Chuck Wendig article. I love this one. I've been using this article for years in my English classes. And I was so excited with novel writing to get the opportunity to introduce you to Chuck on a much wider scale. And so we're using a lot more of his writing in this class than I do in my others. My other classes just get this one. But he has so many wonderful insights into writing. And I want to work our way through the article right now this way. So you get me talking about these different items that he's bringing up about storytelling, writing and storytelling. So this is, of course, at the top of his blog, which maybe you have seen by this point. It says Chuck Wendig is a novelist, a screenwriter, and a game designer. This is his blog. He talks a lot about writing and food and the madness of toddlers. He uses lots of naughty language, not safe for work, probably not safe for life, be advised. Now, let me just be honest with you. When I first started using this article to teach class, I didn't know what NSFW meant. So I asked one of my children who promptly said, "Mom, that's not safe for work." And I said, "Okay." Now I know. Thank you. I had to do that yesterday with one of my kids. He said, let me get this right. He said, all right, Mama, I'll LYK. I said, what's LYK? And he hearted that. which I know meant he was laughing, but he said, let you know. And I went, oh, okay. So we're abbreviating let you know now. All right, I can get down with this. So NSFW, NSFL. I was just assuming that NSFL then meant not safe for life. Right? Right? Am I right? I hope I'm right. Anyway, moving on. I think we're moving on. Oh, disclaimer. And you already know this because you've been reading some of Wendig's writing. But I have placed euphemisms throughout because Wendig tends to have a dirty mouth. So the F word in this PowerPoint will be replaced with the word fish. When I was teaching at Vatterott, I used to make my students say fish in the classroom instead of the other word. And I guess because they found me so entertaining, they did. They frequently talked about fishers and fishing. Mother fishers. Oh, golly. Those were the days. Super funny. All right, here we go. We're jumping into the article. The first one here is Chuck Wendig says, don't write what you know what you write. Saying write what you know limits us from the outset. We only know a limited number of things after all. I know the smell of honeysuckle on a summer's day. I know what it's like to have a toddler, to be a terrible bowler, to slurp up gin from my rat's nest of a beard so as not to waste its herbal booziness. We certainly should write to our experiences, but we cannot limit ourselves only to that. We should be encouraged then to have new experiences, to know and learn new things. Write with authority and authenticity. Marry experience with imagination in a ceremony upon the story's page. So he's saying, don't just settle for what you do know. Get out there and learn some new things. Have some new experiences that you can then take and add to your writing. In my book, For Love of Words, I wanted to write a scene where this girl goes on a walk through the woods. She's going along the river and she's going to find this viaduct, this overpass over the river that she can sit underneath. Like she has a special like sitting and reading spot out in the woods where this train bridge goes over the water, and it's not a place that people know about much. And so she's going to walk to that space. Well, I'm from southeastern Oklahoma. I don't really know places like that. I've only seen it in pictures. And so what I did was I've set the story in Pennsylvania where I've never been, but I've seen a lot of pictures. And so I got online and I researched even more pictures of Pennsylvania, and I looked up train bridges in Pennsylvania, and I familiarized myself with them, and I looked at them in great detail and then wrote out descriptions. And then I picked from those descriptions how I wanted to construct the bridge in my story where she's going to go and sit. And I also, for her walk through the woods, I had a friend who had about 80 acres in the middle of Missouri. And so I went out to her land and I took a chair and I went and I sat. And I just listened so that I could use my senses in pulling that together. I walked, I listened to the sounds under my feet. When I sat, I listened to the birds moving around. I paid attention to what it felt like to walk through the woods with things bumping against me, things of that nature. I went and I experienced it so that I could write it. And so this is what he's talking about here. He's saying, don't limit yourself. Go have some new experiences so that you have the authority then to write about those things. Right? Do use your imagination, but also go have experiences so that you can include these things in a informed way in your writing. Oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. When I was one English class that I was teaching a few years ago, in order to do this, I had the students follow me. I wanted them to describe the entryway to the school. And most of us just walk through it. You walk through it, you sit down in the classroom, and I say, describe the entryway to the school. Okay. And so you might remember that there's tile floor. You might remember that the ceiling is tall. You might remember that there are not many places to sit. So I had the class follow me out there. And then we wrote down everything that we observed from our senses. What do you hear when you walk through this hall? What do you see? What do you feel? Touch the walls, touch the counter, touch the floor, right? Write down all these things, not so much taste, but what do you smell when you enter into that foyer, this big space? And so each one of them wrote different notes, and we went back to the classroom, and then we talked about our discoveries and what did we learn, what did we experience, and we were then able to write much more descriptive pieces. And it was beautiful. It was a wonderful experience. Something that I definitely encourage you to do for yourself is to go and put yourself in different places, different scenarios. Go have some new experiences so that you can work those into your writing. In another one of my pieces that I've never finished, which I don't know if I ever will. I think it was just something for us, a particular time period that was just a story, but I didn't really fall in love with the characters, I guess. But in one scene, there's a horrific crash in a NASCAR type environment. I've never been to those kind of races. I went to like the dirt track races when I was in college years ago in Monette, Missouri, but I've never been to like one, like the Daytona 500 or whatever those, I don't even know fully what they're called. I've been in the parking lot of the Daytona Speedway, but I've never been like inside. So I wanted to write this. I had created a character who was a race car driver. And so I needed this event to occur, and I didn't have access to go to an event like that. So I got on YouTube and I watched a whole lot of NASCAR crashes. And I listened, closed my eyes and listened and took notes. And then I watched and took notes. And then I considered, how would I feel if I were this guy's wife sitting in the crowd, or girlfriend? And I pulled all of that together to help me write that scene. And every time I've read through it, I've cried. So it's well written. It's still sitting in my computer. I've not ever done anything with it, but it's there. It just hasn't found its home yet. Then Chuck's talking about bleed on the page. And I might not go through every one of the 25 things in the article, but we're going to touch on some that I believe are very important. They are all important, but the ones that I think are most important. He says, bleed on the page. Don't write purely to escape pain and fear. Mine it. Extract those wretched little nuggets of hard black hate coal and use them to fuel the writing of a scene, a chapter, maybe the whole gosh darn book. Cut yourself open. Color the words with your heart's blood. I'm an advocate of finding the things that you fear and opening old wounds to let them splash onto the characters and inform the tale at hand. We'll know, and we'll feel it too. This is where your experience matters. It's not necessarily in the nitty-gritty of mechanical experience, but rather in the authenticity of your emotional life. And this is true for the opposite as well. Write about the things that thrill you, that stir hope, that deliver unto you paroxysms of tingly exultation. Be true to yourself, and we'll all grope your lingo, Daddy-o. Chuck is saying, dig in deep and use your authentic emotions to write your story. Cut yourself open. Use your fears. Stephen King does that. In an interview I watched, he said that is the entire basis of Pet Sematary. Fear of losing your child. It's the entire basis of Pet Sematary. In another interview, I learned that all of his stories are based in his fears. When he was a young boy, about 7 years old, there was a serial killer in Texas, even though he lived in Maine. There was a serial killer in Texas that he had been reading articles about in the newspaper. And he was collecting those articles. And it kind of freaked his mom out. Like, why are you collecting these like in a scrapbook? It's a little odd, son. And he said that his child mind didn't have the words to explain to her correctly that he was collecting those pictures because there was something in that man's eyes that scared him. And that something was nothing. That there was nothing in that man's eyes. And he wanted to be able to avoid people with nothing in their eyes. And so he was collecting them so he could study them, so he could avoid them, because he had a deep-seated fear of empty eyes. We need to capitalize on our emotional lives in our stories. Dig in deep. Our joys, our fears, our pains, our excitements, our sadnesses, and fill the pages with that authenticity. Chuck calls it bleeding on the page. In my comp classes, I call it word vomit. Just dig in and be authentic. Don't hold back. Just go for it. Close your eyes and go for it. Put yourself back into that headspace or that emotional space and go for it in your writing. I did that for a class. It was a fiction class, and the assignment was to write about, and this kind of like the memoir assignment I gave you. We had to write about something that scared us when we were children, and we had to put ourselves back into that memory, cut ourselves open, and write about it as adults. Like really dig into that old fear. And so I wrote out my childhood nightmare. But what I did was, the technique that I tried was I went into my room with my laptop and I turned off the light. So it was just me and the laptop, and it was dark. And I know the keyboard with my fingers. Like, I can't sit here and tell you the order of all the keys, but I can type really well. And so I don't necessarily need to look at the keyboard while I'm typing. So I'm in the room in the dark, and I'm closing my eyes. And I put myself back into that nightmare. And I walked through it. And I wrote out everything I heard, everything I saw, everything I smelled, everything I felt. There might have even been taste. I turned that in. My professor's response to me was Craig Schneider. Thank you, Craig. My professor's response to me was, Dacia, you should submit this to a horror magazine. At that point in my life, I was like, what? I'm a mom of 6, right? I'm a stay-at-home mother of 6. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Submit this to a horror magazine. I'm more suited for Reader's Digest or Better Housekeeping. No, not really, because it don't do those well, but whatever. But he did. He said, you should submit this to a horror magazine. And it got me thinking. And so I looked up some small publishing companies, some literary presses, and I did. I submitted it. It got published. It was the very first thing I had ever had published, and it was very exciting to me. It was the first time I had done this, bled on the page, and really opened myself up and let the authenticity of my emotions tell the story more than my thinking brain. Because your thinking brain is going to stop you. Okay? We need to let our emotions, our fears, our joys build our stories. fill our characters. Write the song that sings to your heart. Brands are for corn chips and car commercials. Trends are for great pop music and nightclubs. But you, write the book you want to write. It's not like being a writer is a fast track to a dumpster full of cash. So why waste time writing stories that don't speak to you in some way? Besides, the books that you wrench free from your own heart and mind will be far greater and far more meaningful than anything delivered to you from the expectations of others. Find the story in you and find yourself in the story. Write about what's in here, just like gnawing to get out of you. That's where you really need to focus. You might have, and we're going to talk about that today, 3 different storylines, 3 different ideas that you might have. But which one's really gnawing at you? Which one is like, please, please, let me out? That's where you want to go. Show now, tell later. Show, don't tell is another one of those false dichotomy nuggets of advice. Anytime a piece of forbidding advice exists, you can nearly always produce a corollary example where X, Y, and Z stories utterly violate that precept with a great heaping helping of success. It seems to be fairly well regarded that a lot of the time it's best to default to show. But sometimes, hey, tell is good too. The only problem is when. Here's a good guideline: never tell in the beginning, always show first. You don't want to begin the story with an expositional lecture. You read the cereal box as you eat the cereal, not before. You got to get that first spoonful of honey boo-boo bombs on your tongue before you're ready to settle in and read an ingredients list, yeah? Order of operations is key. Dessert first, veggies later. Show now, put off telling as long as you can. Hook them. Hook your reader. Reel them in. Use those emotions, set the scene, something cataclysmic, something really emotional, something shocking, surprising. Show it in vivid detail. That's how we begin. Aim big, write small. Writers need goals, and I don't mean one goal. I mean a nearly endless and evolving series of goals. You don't just say, I'm going to write a novel. Because, duh, that's bare minimum stuff. And he did not actually use the word stuff. So this is a much harsher statement than what I've included here. That's bare minimum. You want to have a career planned out. This isn't a short game, it's a long con. Look as far down the line as you can, to retirement, to cremation, to the time when nanobots resurrect you to write one more best-selling holovid. That way you can always course correct to try to move yourself further toward those goals. But, whereas your career is a long con, each story really is the short game. You want to keep your head in the story. You want to treat it like it's everything, like everything hangs on this one project, in part because it might. To put it differently, have the larger path plotted out, but focus on each step upon the path as if it is your last. He's saying, put your best foot forward always. Right? Do know where it is that you want to head. Do know what your goals are, where you want to be, but don't sell yourself short right now. Stay focused. Every project is important. Whether you end up using that project for something or not, like the car crash video that or the car crash scene that I wrote, like, it's not gone unused. It's still there, and I can draw from it as a resource, but I put my all into writing that scene. So we need to do that with everything that we do and keep moving forward. I think that's lovely. And then he says, character is everything. Here's how you know that character is the most important component of storytelling. When you remove it, the story dies. It's like yanking the walker out of an old dude's hands. You can remove the plot and characters will still make one. Setting, story can work without one. Heck, no setting is a setting. Theme, someone will add their own. Mood, you can steer the mood, but you can't control it. Mood, like art and profanity, is in the many eyes of the monstrous D&D beholder. Character is why we show up. It's why we watch movies and read books. character is the linchpin of story. To unpack that a little more, the audience is the monkey on the character's back. See, here's the deal. We're all humans. Well, except you over there, you robot. No, don't talk to me. I shall not abide your bleeps and blorps and murderous metal intent. Humans tell stories, and when we do, we tell them about other humans. And here you say, wait, that's not right. We tell stories about unicorns and intelligent spaceships and mole men. And yes, technically true, but those are always stand-ins for people. We view all characters through the lens of our own humanity. It's the same reason trees only read magazines about trees, printed on the flesh of humans. The circle of life. Character is how the audience gets through your story. Character is the vehicle. You have to build your characters. Stephen King does that in his novels. The first few chapters are just you getting to know the characters before something dastardly is going to happen. He wants you to care about them. You get to know your characters. You get to know your characters. You write your characters, and then something happens. How do your characters respond? Let them respond. If you built them well enough, they will. So we have to keep our stories human and understand character is vitally important to your story. With that, we go to plot is Soylent Green. Some of you might get that. Some of you don't. That's okay. I'm going to read this and then perhaps explain that. Said it before, but let me codify it now. Plot is not externally driven. I mean, it can be fine, yes. You can create a laundry list of external events that occur where characters are dropped into the proceedings like a pukey 4-year-old forced to ride a roller coaster. But that's not the strongest nor the most organic way to approach plot. Plot is Soylent Green. Plot is made of people. Characters create, drive, and modify plot. They're not strapped into the ride. They're building the fishing roller coaster as it barrels forward. They change the story with every bad decision, every punch thrown, every intense desire, and madcap fear. Too many storytellers force events. They shove the plot around like a schoolyard bully. Let the characters handle it. Let it be on them. The simplest plot is your characters do things. Other characters respond. Plot is made of people. So the reason he uses the term Soylent Green is because there's a movie from like the 70s where there was a food product being served to people that was comprised of the passed on bodies of other people, cannibalizing the population. Boom. So that's what he's referencing here. She'll love science fiction. So great. Or is that science fiction? Maybe not in some societies. I don't know. Anyway, the idea here is let your characters tell your story. Make sure that your writing is human, that your characters are real and wild and full of emotion and authentic to your internal self. Conflict is the food that feeds the reader. Characters exist in a flat line until we challenge them. Sometimes they challenge themselves. Sometimes they're challenged by other people, by nature, by robots, or by fungal infections in and around one's nether country. Stories need conflict across the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual spectra. Accidents, betrayals, cataclysm, desperation, excess. These are the letters in the alphabet of conflict. Your story has to have conflict. You must have conflict in order for the story to work. So, challenge your characters. Boom. And then fish trust. We think we want trustworthy storytellers. Trust is a positive trait, and why would we want anything different in a storyteller? The audience thinks it knows what it wants. Happy endings, triumphant protagonists, defeated villains, a book that dispenses chicken McNuggets at the end of every chapter is a reward. But getting what we want, what we expect is, well, I didn't do that very well, snooze-tacular. Trust in a storyteller is overrated. Safety is meaningless. The storyteller has to do what the storyteller has to do, which is hurt the character. And by proxy, the audience. The storyteller is like an evil dungeon master or a tricksy dominatrix. What the audience really wants is to acquiesce to the tale told. They want to be surprised by a particularly inventive dungeon trap or shocked when someone closes alligator clamps on your wriggly bits. We want to trust our storytellers only so far as to say, I trust that I cannot trust you. We need to be willing to just be loose, to be wild, to hurt our characters, shock our audience, be authentic to that person inside of you that would never act like that for real. Let that out. Because what your audience really wants is to be shocked, is to be scared, is to cry, is to laugh. They're coming to you for a story that is going to relax them or entertain them or terrify them. And we have to give it to them. Fish trust. Ah, I love that. And then we have the dual function of story. Good story serves two functions. One, it makes coffee, and two, it shoots lasers. Wait, that can't be right. Checks notes. Oh, see, sorry, wrong page. Those are the two things I want my cybernetic arm to do. Whatevs. Story. Yes, story. Good story does two things. One, it makes us feel, and two, it makes us think. It engages us emotionally and intellectually. Some authors misunderstand the story's purpose and spend too long mired in action and entertainment and forget that we actually have to care about the characters, about the outcome, that it's essential that we come out of the book having both a visceral reaction and a reaction that makes us want to sit down with friends over pie and whiskey to talk about what we just read. Making someone think and feel is not entertaining in the strictest sense, but it's why stories matter. Don't lose sight, as a writer, that we are here to cause our readers to both feel and think. Story has a dual function. We have a message we want them to think about, and we know that we have to encapsulate that with what which will make them feel. That felt really strangely worded, but it made sense to me. We need to encapsulate what will cause them to think with what makes them feel. It's beautiful. Embrace the holy shnikes moment. I want to punch you in the stomach. With my words, relax, put down the restraining order. When you read my work, the ideal thing for me is to provide you with at least one moment where you gasp, where your eyes go wide and your jaw hangs loose like a broken porch swing, where you let out 3, maybe 4 drops of pee because the story caused you to lose your bearing for just that moment. It's key as a storyteller to try to orchestrate those moments where you violate expectation and drop a bunker buster on the characters. Be careful, though. The trick to the holy stuff moment is that it needs to feel organic, so that after the smoke is cleared and the trauma is worn thin, the events that transpired seem in retrospect like the only way it could have ever happened. We need to embrace those moments in our writing where the characters experience something that the audience is not expecting, these holy cow moments where you just let it rip. Like they were not expecting that car accident. It came out of the blue, right? They were not expecting that piece of mail. They were not expecting the bomb drop. They weren't expecting but it's vital to the story and it needs to feel authentic. And if you've built your characters well enough, when these things happen and their reactions to them are authentic to the characters, then your scene is going to work, right? This is called the willing suspension of belief, the WSB. If you build your characters well enough and you have your audience reeled in, they will be willing to suspend belief, meaning they know this is fiction, but they're going to be so pulled into it that at the moment while they're reading, this is real. And so when it is real, when you have reeled them in, then you can have the event occur and your reader goes, oh, but they're with you because they have willingly suspended belief, and then they embrace your holy shnikes moment. It's good stuff. Here's how description works. A persistent question in terms of writing is, what and how much do I describe? Lovecraft describes every lamp and carpet fiber with intimate, bewildering detail, which he can get away with, and you most likely cannot. Here's how you know what to describe. Ready? Is your mind quivering like the dumpy haunches of an overweight pony? Describe those things that break the status quo, that defy expectation. We know what a chair looks like, so you don't need to describe it, unless it's got a broken leg, or is of some unusual art period, or has blood on it, or is made of mouse bones and rat whiskers, or sings show tunes. The things that need description are the things that, to risk redundancy, the audience needs described. If they cannot escape this chapter without knowing how this thing smells, then you talk that stench up post haste. Right? What does your audience need described? Then describe it. This is where a reader, like a intended reader, I think Stephen King talks about that in the book on writing, having an IR, an intended reader, someone who can review your work for you, that is going to be truthful with you. Say, can you see this in your head? If they can, okay. If not, add some description. The rule of threes. When in doubt, the rule of threes is a rule that plays well with all of storytelling. When describing a thing, no more than 3 details. A character's arc, 3 beats. A story, 3 acts. An act, 3 sequences. A plot point culminating in a mystery of a twist. At least 3 mentions throughout the tale. This is an old rule and a good one. It's not universal, but it is a good place to start. So several years ago, I was living with my parents, and I was watching Law and Order Special Victims Unit, which is one of my favorite shows. And I was watching it, and Jeremy Irons played a psychiatrist in quite a few episodes. Well, I didn't know that. And so I'm sitting there watching it, and I see Jeremy Irons on the screen, and I flip out and I start yelling for my mom, 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 Henry's on TV. And my mom comes into the room and she's like, what? And I go, look, Henry from my book, For Love of Words, he's on TV. And she looks at the character, she looks up there at Jeremy Irons, and she goes, that's not Henry. And I went, yeah, it literally is. That's literally Henry. That's not what he looks like. It was the greatest, because what I knew in that moment was that I had described Henry well. I had given him just enough description that her imagination was able to kick in and create that character fully in her own mind. And this is what happens when we stick with the rule of threes. We're inviting our reader to fill in the blanks with their own imagination. You don't want to over-describe. You want to give them just enough so that their imaginations come in and fill in the rest. And then they're hooked, they're in, they're with you. You want their imagination engaged in your story. So that was a moment for me, because I went, yes. Ah, good stuff. Good stuff. That's a favorite memory with my sweet mama. She was not having it. She was like, that is not Henry. It's like, that literally is Henry. No. Oh, I love that moment. Every story is an argument. Every story is you saying something. That's theme. Maybe it's the theme that the audience discovers. Maybe it isn't. Maybe just the same. Every story is you making a case for something. It's a thesis that you're trying to prove. You're trying to say that love is everything, or love is hopeless, or that nature will defeat man, or man will defeat himself, or bees will defeat bears, or robots are fishing awesome. I don't know, man. I'm not you. Have a point of view. Have a perspective. Let your fiction state a case and argue that stuff till it's blue in the face. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about saying something. Every story is an argument. Every story that you write has a theme in it. Now, your reader might draw a different theme than what you intend. That's not up to you. You can't control that. But you still can build your story. You do have a message. Are you aware of it? They're going to find something. But we need to know that every story that comes to us is saying something. It's some aspect inside of you that you think is true, that story is putting out there for the world to read. I think that's pretty amazing. Stories are like people. They need oxygen. All aspects of a story need time to breathe. Your story isn't one of those amusement park rides that shoots you up 100 feet straight into the air. A story isn't a race to the end. Plus, that kind of thing will surely cause you to void your bowels upon whatever meth-scarred carny is operating this so-called amusement ride, a ride that hasn't been serviced since 1972 and still has the blood of the teenage girl who died on it greasing all of its diabolical gears. Let the tale have peaks and valleys, peaks of action, tension, and violence. Then the valleys of reflection, emotion, fear, and desire. The oxygen is thin at the peaks and thick in the valleys. The peaks get taller as the story goes, and the valleys grow deeper. To go back to the show versus tell thing, it's better to show at the peaks and tell only in the valleys. Your story has to have ups and downs. It has to take them up to a climax and bring them down and let them breathe. Have some normalcy in the story's tale. Got to go up and down. But as you draw towards the final climax, that's when you kind of build a little, and then you build a little higher, and then you go up, 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 boom. But that's how we need to build our stories. They need oxygen. Your reader needs time to be able to take a breath. Now, here's one that is extremely important. They're all important, but this one I really want you to hear. Care less. This is a recent revelation for me, but one I'm keeping close for the near future. Sure, it seems an odd thing to suggest that we should care less than we already do. It seems dismissive, disrespectful even. But authors care too much in my experience. We care well beyond the gates of rationality. We let the perfect sit in its impossible to reach treehouse, pelting us with sticks and stones and pieces of old G.I. Joe figures, when really we should be happy aiming firmly for the good. Caring less frees you. It frees you to write a bad draft and fix it later. Did I yell that part? I might have yelled that part. Bad draft. We all write a bad draft. Every author writes a bad draft first. No one comes out of the gate writing perfectly. Stop it. Stop editing as you write. Stop it now. You need to care less. Let me read that part again. It frees you to write a bad draft and fix it later. It frees you from feeling stung by every not 5-star review. It frees you from the fear of the editor's slashing pen. It frees you from the paralysis of rejection. Care less. Note that the lesson here isn't don't care. You should care. But you should also calm the fish down a little, is all I'm saying. I love this piece. Love this. You guys are tightly wound. You are so concerned with what people are going to think. You're very worried about having someone else look at your work. I know I'm talking to many of you. You need to care less. Breathe. We're all in the same boat, right? We're all doing the same thing. It's going to be okay. You need other people's eyes on your work, and you need to not be stung by every critique. You need those critiques because they're going to be able to see things that you cannot see. Don't you want your work to be good? Then we need to care less so we can allow others to help us become better. Stop trying to be perfect right out of the gate. It does not happen. When Stephen King writes a manuscript, he puts it away for 6 weeks. He doesn't look at it. He doesn't think about it. Nothing. In fact, he'll start another project. After that time goes by, he'll get it back out when he's objective, when he cares less. Then he can read through it. And only then does he take it to Tabitha, his wife. She is his intended reader. She is his first reader with everything that he writes. And he hands it to her. She reads through it. She gives her critique. He changes things according to what Tabitha has suggested. And then it goes to the editor. It's all about being able to breathe. You're not going to be perfect right out of the gate. Not a single one of us, myself included. Not even Stephen King with 350 million copies of his books sold. The most prolific writer. He's not perfect out of the gate. So stop trying to be. You have to care less. Right? Have to. Have to. Have to. If you want to be successful with writing, you have to care less. And I want to tell you a little story here real quick. It says it frees you from not feeling or from feeling stung by every not 5-star review. When I first had The American Queen published, this was back in 2012. And it was done through a small publishing company in St. Louis, Rocking Horse Publishing. They're no longer in business, but they had put the book out, and it was on Amazon, and I was collecting some reviews, and I would check them occasionally because that's what you do when you have something on Amazon. You want to see if it's doing well. And I got on there one day, and there was a 1-star review, and in capital letters, it said, "I would not recommend this book to anyone." And I went, but maybe not for the same reason of reaction that you might have thought. I did not take that personally because I had been through grueling workshop processes and peer review processes in my master's program. I was past that shit. That Karen Less thing, right? Okay, I'm good. I'm good. Because I needed to know why. I needed to know why she gave me a 1-star review. Not because I was feeling defensive, but because what I understand is if you're getting all 5s and they're all like, "Oh, this was great. It was wonderful." I know they're just people afraid of being honest. So I looked her up. I sure did. It's not that hard to find people on the internet if you're just a little bit tenacious. So I looked her up and I found a way to email this lady. And so I emailed her and I said, "Hi, this is Dacia. I'm the author of The American Queen. I had some questions. Would you mind talking with me?" And she responded, and I think she might have been a little freaked out, but she was willing. And you know what I discovered? I discovered that she had actually been really into the story and that she had actually enjoyed the story. But when she came to the end, it really made her angry. It made her so angry that in capital letters, she said, "I would not recommend this book to anyone." But she said to me, she said, "Alice did not deserve that ending." And I went, okay. And I got to thinking about it. And she was right. I had just written this series of mess that this character was creating and leaving this wake. And then in the last chapter, I just went, whoop, fixed. Now my 5-star people, they were like, it was good, I loved it. But Nancy was like, done, no, don't want it. And I was like, I see what you're saying. I understand. So you know what I did? I started writing a second book. I took the story and I thought, this needs to continue. So in the meantime, my publishing company went out of business. So that book was no longer available. I mean, you can still like find some copies out there of that original one, but I lost my original manuscript because I didn't read all the fine print. You want to always read the fine print in your contracts. So I had to start back over from an original manuscript with that story, and I love the story. But I was able to take the original story and the story that I had started building as a result of Nancy's review and Nancy's conversation with me. And then I combined them. And so now Alice's adventure is much more intense and longer. And the book almost doubled in size before it reaches a conclusion that's right, that's good. And I'm super excited about it now. I'm very proud of that work. And I'm so grateful to Nancy's 1-star review. Now, at some point, she went in and changed it to a 3. I even had her help me. This gal lives like in West Virginia or somewhere, like we've never met, right? I even had her review the manuscript for the next book I had coming out for Love of Words. She said that she would be willing to review that for me, which was fantastic. Fantastic. I loved having her on board as a reviewer. So be open and care less. Embrace critique because others will see things that you can't see. Let go of your anxiety, let go of your fear, and let your story happen. Just let it be. That first draft is going to be bad. It's supposed to be. It's why it's a rough draft. All right. Realize your reach. You can only control so much. You can't control agents or publishers or the audience unless you're some kind of Pied Piper Svengali, which actually explains how some tremendously poopy books get such rabid fan throttling. You can control your story. You control characters, plot, the words on the page, the rhythm, the pacing. You control the quality of the work. So control that. Write the best book you can possibly write. Everything else is a leaf on the river. You can maybe puff out your cheeks and blow it. Hey, blow it. This way or that. But so much is left to the vagaries of fate. Control what you can and abide the rest. You can only control so much. Sometimes your book's going to write itself. And sometimes it might not do real great. But control what you can. Absolutely control what you can. And don't get upset. Now here. Harden the fish up, Care Bear. Not only do you need to care less and fish trust, but you need to harden the fish up, Care Bear. The writer's back is studded with arrows, blow darts, quills, 1-star reviews, red pens, rejection letters rolled up into tight little tubes, and shellacked with editor spit so as to form the equivalent of prison ships. It's hard out there for a wandering pen monkey. We don't have the equivalent of a hobo code with chalk marks on the sidewalk indicating dangerous vanity press lives here, or deluded self-publisher blog high on his own ego incoming, or that away lurks a mean old editor face. So cultivate calluses, secrete enzymes to build your own authorial exoskeleton. Learn to take a punch. No glass jaws in writing, pal. Get good with critique and harden the fish up. Get some thick skin. You want to be in this creative writing game? You want to put yourself out there? You've got to have thick skin. You've got to be willing to tell that story and let the story tell itself and not be worried about what people are going to think. Put it out there. Let others help you. That's how we do this thing. It's good stuff. Completo el pupo. Finishing a story will separate you from most other writers out there in author land. Finish your workspace case. Here, let me put it to you this way. Finishing the worst piece of stuff story that you've ever written will feel 1,000 times better than not finishing the most brilliant tale you've ever spun. Achieve narrative euphoria. Finish your story. And if any of you are actually going to consider giving NaNoWriMo a chance this year, and I'll talk about it periodically leading up to November. If you're going to try to give it a go, it's a beautiful feeling to reach the end of November and having actually accomplished your 50,000 words in 30 days. The brilliant feeling, and then you get this cool certificate. Yeah. I have a few of those, but guess what? I also put them on LinkedIn and I put them on my resume. I have finished NaNoWriMo 3 times out of my 5 attempts. Sometimes life just makes it hard, but that's okay. Very excited about those 3 times. But completo el pupo, it feels good to finish a project, so do. Read your work out loud. Don't give me that look. Read your work out loud. Don't argue, don't fight. It will help. I promise, I guarantee it. If you find it didn't help you, let me know. I will let you taser me in the face. And by me, I mean some other guy who will be my stand-in, probably some real estate agent or toll booth attendant. Read your work out loud. Your ears will hear mistakes that your eyes don't see. You're going to read this in every comp textbook. You're going to read this pretty much in writing advice from most any author out there. Everyone's going to tell you, read your work out loud. And you're going to go, no, I'll feel stupid. Oh, my word. Harden the fish up. Read your work out loud. I didn't say read your work out loud to 100 people. Sit in your room, close your door, and read your work out loud. Now, maybe your mom comes along and goes, who are you talking to in there? And then you're going to be like, oh, so embarrassed. Why are you embarrassed? You say, I'm editing my paper. I have to read it out loud so I can hear mistakes that my eyes don't see. Oh, she says, okay. And she might go, make a face or whatever, because that would make her embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed about stuff like that. You need to read it out loud. You need to hear it. Have someone else read it to you. You need to hear it. Your ears are going to catch some of those sentences that are not in the correct order, because you're going to go, wait a minute. That beach doesn't have messy hair. I do. Right? You need that. And then haters going to hate. Fish them. They're part of the ecosystem. Drink the hate like it's Kahlua and cream. Inspiring love and hate is better than inspiring a middle of the road mushy moderate shrug. I'd rather have your story made the mailman just for delivering it to me, rather than a quavering meh. I'd rather inspire hate than boredom. Haters gonna hate. You're not gonna please everyone. Fish them. Tell your story. And then write like the end is nigh. The best advice I can give right now is write like you have no time left. Write like you've got a slow-mo bullet tumbling towards your head and you can't get out of the way. Write like the end times are here, like the Mayans were right, and in a few short months, we're all going to die in a tidal wave, earthquake, pyroclastic, stuff-fit bird attack. Think about that. Let's say you had 2 years left on your clock. What book would you write? What story inside you struggles to get to the front of the line, screaming and yelping and waving its arms like a drowning man? Write that story. It doesn't have to be the only thing you write. You can take paycheck jobs, but make time for that kind of writing. Writing isn't just about giving the audience something. It isn't just entertainment. It's about giving to yourself too. Because bad news, maybe you do have 2 years left. Maybe you have 20 or 40 or 60, but we're all going to end up under the Grim Reaper's writing mower. So get busy writing what you want to write, or get busy sucking exhaust. I don't think I need to expound on that a whole lot. What story is inside of you, screaming, yelping, and waving its arms to be told? You may not have a lot of time left. So tell that story. And I'm talking to myself here too. All right, we're done with that article. I love all of that. Now, another thing I want to talk to you about is present tense. With our writing in this class, I am challenging you to write in present tense as opposed to past tense. Present tense makes a story more intense because it's happening to your reader as they read it. In past tense, they can separate from it a little bit. They understand from the verbs that this is over. It's why I like to watch paranormal shows, not paranormal movies. Because in a paranormal show, it's a documentary, and the people who the event happened to are telling the story of what happened to them. So I know they end up okay, so it doesn't scare me to watch it. Past tense. Now, a movie, that's happening in present tense. That's happening to me as I'm watching it. I can handle that. I can't handle that. Big difference. Much prefer paranormal TV shows, documentaries over paranormal movies and books, because it's happening now. So be thinking about, how do I make my story more intense? Present tense. That's how. Word choices, yes, but we also want to write in present tense if we can. All right. Our first discussion thread. We have 2 this week. The first discussion thread, it's a getting to know yourself deeper. You have some questions here that you're going to answer, and I want you to utilize all of the information from the Chuck Wendig assignment to help you do it. I want you to be honest. I want you to use your senses. I want you to be descriptive in your responses to these questions on the discussion board. What makes you angriest? What makes you happy? What makes you most fearful? What drives your ambition? What is your greatest weakness? If you have $10 to spend on a snack, what do you buy? How do you march to the beat of your own drum? What is your favorite smell or scent? If you have to be handcuffed to someone for 28 hours or 24 hours, who would it be? If your ketchup weren't available, or if ketchup weren't available, what would you dip your fries in? And yeah, comment. Oh, it's actually 5. Comment on at least 5 classmates' posts, and until you do, that does not submit for grading, and you know that. So we're done with the PowerPoint. Super exciting. I love this. Very happy about it. It's a wonderful, wonderful walkthrough today. I hope that you've enjoyed this as much as I did. I love talking about writing, and I love going over that article. There's so many fantastic things that we can take away from it. Just life-changing information if you really let some of these ideas sink in. I mean, seriously, harden the fish up, Care Bear, and care less. Care less. Bleed on the page and finish what you start. So much good information in there. So much. I really want you to internalize it. Now, the other discussion thread for today is storylines. And I want you to be thinking about what are 3 potential storylines that you might want to write about for our 20,000 word project this semester. And not just the storyline, but some characters that you might include. And you're going to put these in your discussion thread. Now I want to show you, I've already written mine out, and I wrote it first in Word. I think I even edited it a little bit here. So my book, A Kiss in the Rain, which I've shown you before, I believe. This is actually the picture from the cover. I had a former student drew this for me for my story. And I absolutely love it. Both of these pictures are from A Kiss in the Rain. But that's the cover photo. Love it, very much love it. So when the book was published years ago, I've had multiple people over the years say, oh, I want a book about these characters. I want a book about that character. When are you going to write about this character? When are you going to tell that character's life? And I'm like, I wrote the story I wanted to write, you know? So my cousin, Linda, she's a little older than me, but she was an English teacher in her career and a librarian also. She called me and she wanted to let me know that she had just finished reading The American Queen. She's also read A Kiss in the Rain. And we got to talking about both books and we were talking through both stories. And she said to me that she thought I should write some stories about the other characters from A Kiss in the Rain. And I started laughing. I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, do you know how many people have said this to me? Okay, I guess I need to. So that's got me thinking. And so I wrote out 3 different storylines that came to me as outlier stories from A Kiss in the Rain. And now it's the one that I have asked that you, if you want to, for some extra credit, you can read through it and then write me a list of 10 critiques. I'd love your thoughts. Which might you like to read? And so this is what we're going to do in this discussion thread is we're going to write 3 different storylines with some characters. And we're going to let our classmates give us some insight on which of those they might be most wanting to read. Which of those 3 would you want to pick up and read? So here are my 3. Number 1, The Judge's Choice, I think is what I might title it. John and Victoria Clark's life together began like a fairy tale, rubbing elbows with high society, living vicariously through their daughter Daphne, and their names on the top lists of charities across the state. They're proud people, wealthy people, until Daphne's teenage impulse actions bring shame upon the family. At this, the facade of their lives crumbles, and John finds himself in prison with Victoria on the edge of filing for divorce. When a once so perfect life crashes to the ground, is there hope, or are they destined to live in the murky shadow of scandal? Number 2, The Lady in Red. She graced the cover of magazines from coast to coast. Adeline was the doll of the stage, a hit on Broadway and in the hearts of men. One, a wealthy bank owner, asked her to be his wife and offered her everything she could ever desire, except George, the man her heart loved. He was poor and could offer her nothing more than his heart, and she chose wealth. Adeline tried to fit into her new role as a socialite wife and mother until everything fell apart, and she was left alone with no forgiveness for herself. Throughout the remainder of her life, she tried to stay off the radar, doing for others as she could, but not for herself. And George never left her heart or her side, the stagehand with nothing but love to give. But could it ever be right to hope to right all of her wrongs to him, to her husband, to her child? And so it's the story of a woman in her 80s who's reflecting back over her life. And number 3, A Life Not Lived. She envied Victoria, hated Victoria, and she obsessed over everything Victoria had and did. Nothing ever seemed to go right for Jacqueline. And then her mother died, leaving her to care for her niece and her niece's child because they lived in her mother's house. When she saw Daphne, she saw Victoria, and Carl gave her an ultimatum. Jacqueline finds herself at a crossroads of choice. Will she run off the only person who has ever given a damn about her, or will she, in her 50s, find a way to let go of the past? Carl has one foot out the door. So those are 3 storylines that came to me. And then after I wrote the 3, I had more come to me because I realized there were other characters in the story that people have requested to know more about, like Lynn, the nurse. Lynn, the nurse, has people wondering about her life and how did she meet Robert, and how their lives then interconnect into the story in A Kiss in the Rain, because these are all characters from A Kiss in the Rain. Daphne and Adeline are the two main characters for A Kiss in the Rain. So I'm interested to find out in our discussion thread which of those three that you guys might feel would be an interesting read. And so this is what we're doing for our discussion threads for this week. I'm excited to see what you guys are thinking about, what different stories are roaming around in your heads. I will be honest. Well, I'm always honest in my critiques, but in this one, I'm probably going to be a little bit more, yeah, I would read this one. I wouldn't read the other two. I mean, if you choose one of those other two and that's what you're going to write about in the 20,000 words, that I will read it. But as far as if I saw those three stories sitting on a shelf, I'd pick up this one, not one of those. I will let you know that, right? And that's kind of what we're going to be doing for each other in this project. Okay, so I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be very useful for you. I know that it is. I've done it with other classes. So I'm looking forward to that. I realize that this has been long. I hope that it has been helpful. There's been quite a bit of materials in this week. Next week, there's not a quiz. And next week, the video, I think, is 3 minutes long from me. So it's not going to be a long lecture video next week. It's going to be something where you can go, oh, okay. We had a long one last week, but not this week. It's all going to be fine. I promise. All right. But then in week 5, it's a little long again. It's like an hour and 10 or 15 minutes in week 5. And then in week 6, it's only 6 minutes long. So it's just going to be like that. It's some random spattering of information, but you do have those author conversations as well. I've thrown those in because I know they're valuable for you. And if you truly are interested in creative writing, every little bit of insight and advice you can get from other writers will benefit you. So I'm excited to share those with you. I want to, this semester, be stirring that desire for writing inside of you more. You were inspired to take this class because you think you like writing. Some of you know you like writing. Some of you think you like writing. So I'm hoping that this class will really stir that pot for you and get you excited and get you expressing yourself and being able to free yourself to just let the words flow, right? Where you're not worried about what other people think and you're just realizing haters gonna hate, harden the fish up, right? Care less, and just enjoy the process. Really enjoy the process. So with that, I'm going to let you go, and I'll see you around. You know how to get a hold of me if you have any questions.